The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with noise and tension as beings from across the galaxy gathered for another session. Ambassador Lisa Morgan sat quietly in the human section, watching the familiar scene unfold before her tired eyes. She had been doing this job for 15 years, and every session felt the same now. The other species would complain about humanity, and humans would listen in silence. Counselor Vexithara from the Zephyrian Empire stood up on his 4 legs and pointed all 4 of his arms toward the human delegation. His blue skin had turned darker, which meant he was angry. Lisa had learned to read these signs over the years. When Zephyrians got upset, their skin changed color like a mood ring. "The humans have broken our rules again," Vexithara announced in his deep voice that echoed through the chamber. "They went to the Kepler system and interfered in a local war. We told them not to go, but they ignored our orders and went anyway." "Captain," Jake Martinez shifted in his seat next to Lisa. He remembered the desperate messages from the Kepler colonies as their cities burned and their people died. The colonists had begged for help, and the humans had answered that call. But explaining this to the council would be pointless. They had tried explaining before, and it never worked. "The humans saved thousands of lives," Jake whispered to Lisa, but she shook her head slightly. Speaking out would only make things worse. The council did not want to hear about the lives they had saved. Elder Quindar of the Ethereal Collective floated forward in her bubble of light. The Ethereals looked like ghosts made of starlight and claimed to be the oldest species in the galaxy. They thought this gave them the right to tell everyone else what to do. "Humanity continues to disrupt the natural order," Quindar said in her musical voice. "They ignore our territorial agreements and go wherever they please. Last month, they entered our sacred space near Proxima without permission." Dr. Helen Carter closed her eyes and remembered that incident. 3 human medical ships had rushed through ethereal space to reach a planet where a deadly plague was killing millions. The Ethereals had demanded they turn around and let the plague run its course. The humans had refused and saved an entire world. But the council saw this as a crime. The complaints continued for hours. The crystalline hive spoke about how human individuality was dangerous to their collective minds. The Void Seekers complained that human mining ships were too noisy and disturbed their meditation on dead worlds. Every species seemed to have a problem with something humans had done. Lisa listened to each complaint with growing sadness. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago with such hope. They thought they could work together with other species to make the galaxy a better place. Instead, they found a bureaucracy that cared more about rules than lives. The worst part was that humans kept helping anyway. When disasters struck, human ships were always first to respond. When pirates attacked trade routes, human patrols fought them off. When species faced extinction from disease or war, humans intervened to save them. And every time the council punished them for it. "The human delegation will respond to these charges," announced the council speaker. A massive creature that looked like a tree with eyes. Lisa stood up slowly. She was 60 years old now and felt every year of it. Dealing with the council had aged her more than any human conflict ever had. She looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces all staring at her with disapproval. "We understand the council's concerns," Lisa said in a calm voice. "We will take them under advisement." That was it. No defense of their actions. No explanation of why they had saved those lives. No promise to change their ways. Lisa had learned that arguing was useless. The council had already made up their minds about humanity. As the session ended, beings began filing out of the chamber. Vexithara approached Lisa in the corridor outside. His skin was still dark with anger, but his voice was controlled. "Ambassador Morgan, you must understand that humanity's behavior is becoming a serious problem," he said. "The council's patience is not unlimited. There will be consequences if this continues." Lisa looked directly into his large black eyes. She was tired of threats and tired of being lectured by species that would rather watch worlds burn than break a rule. "Neither is ours, counselor," she replied quietly. Vexithera's skin shifted to an even darker shade of blue. He had not expected that response. For 50 years, humans had been polite and diplomatic even when insulted. This was something new. Lisa walked away without another word, leaving the Zephyrians standing confused in the hallway. She joined Jake and Helen at the transport bay where their shuttle waited to take them back to the human embassy. "How much longer can we keep doing this?" Helen asked as they boarded the shuttle. "Not much longer," Lisa answered, looking back at the council building one last time. "Not much longer at all." The shuttle lifted off and headed for the human quarter of the station. None of them spoke during the flight, but they were all thinking the same thing. Something had to change. The galaxy wanted humans to stop interfering in their perfect order. Maybe it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. In her private cabin that night, Lisa composed a message to Earth. It was short and simple, but would change everything. "Request immediate consultation on withdrawal from council participation. Current situation unsustainable." She sent the message and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring another day of complaints and criticism, but it might be one of the last. 6 months had passed since the last heated council session, and the galaxy had grown strangely quiet. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship watching Earth grow larger through the viewport. Her ship was one of hundreds returning to human space as part of the largest military withdrawal in galactic history. The orders had come from the highest levels of human government. All military vessels were to return to Sol's system immediately. All bases outside human territory were to be abandoned. All personnel serving with alien forces were to be recalled. The withdrawal was total and final. Kate had commanded human fleets for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. Usually, when humans pulled back from one area, they moved to another where they were needed more. But this time they were simply going home and staying there. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the cargo ship New Boston," reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster. "Captain Roy Bennett is requesting permission to dock at Mars Station." "Granted," Kate replied. The New Boston was one of the last civilian ships to return from the Outer Rim. Its captain had spent weeks helping evacuate human personnel from dozens of mixed-species facilities across the galaxy. Down on the planet's surface, President Nicole Adams reviewed the withdrawal reports in her office. The numbers were staggering. Over 2 million human citizens had been relocated from alien worlds. 500 military installations had been closed or transferred to local control. Thousands of commercial agreements had been terminated with proper legal notice. The aliens had not made it easy. Many species had begged humans to stay. The Corvan Trade Federation had offered massive payment increases to keep human security, forces protecting their shipping lanes. The Altarian colonies had practically offered to become human protectorates rather than lose their medical support teams. But the decision had been made at the highest levels. Humanity was tired of being criticized for every act of kindness and punished for every life they saved. If the galaxy wanted them gone, then they would get their wish. Captain Chris Thompson commanded one of the evacuation ships that had just returned from Sanctuary Station in the Vega system. The station had been humanity's proudest achievement, outside Sol space. Built as a neutral facility for refugees and displaced persons, it had saved millions of lives over its 10-year existence. "What happens to the people still there?" asked Dr. Susan Clark, the station's former chief medical officer. She had worked alongside alien doctors for years, and leaving them behind felt like abandoning family. "They'll have to manage without us," Chris replied, but his voice carried no satisfaction. Like most humans involved in the withdrawal, he felt like they were making a terrible mistake. But orders were orders, and those orders came from people who understood politics better than ship captains. The hardest part was watching the alien reactions. Many of the species that had worked closest with humans seemed genuinely confused by the withdrawal. They had grown used to human help and protection without realizing how much they depended on it. Dr. Yilnara was a Zephyrian physician who had worked at Sanctuary Station for 8 years. She watched the last human shuttle depart with tears in her large black eyes. "When will you come back?" she called out over the communication channel. The pilot's response was honest and heartbreaking. "I don't know if we will." Meanwhile, in the council chambers on Nexus Prime, the mood was very different. Councillor Vexithara celebrated with his inner circle as reports of the human withdrawal reached them. "Finally," he said, raising a glass of Zephyrian wine, "the galaxy can return to its natural state without human interference." Elder Quindar of the Ethereal Collective was less enthusiastic. She had lived for over 1,000 years and had seen many species rise and fall. The humans were unique in their willingness to help others, even at cost to themselves. Their departure felt like losing something precious. "Perhaps we were too hasty in our criticism," she suggested during a private meeting with other ethereal leaders. "Nonsense," replied Elder Morthak. "The humans were disrupting the cosmic balance with their constant meddling. Their withdrawal will restore proper order to the galaxy. But already there were signs that this proper order might not be what they expected. Emergency calls that would normally bring human ships running now went unanswered. Pirate attacks in remote systems increased as word spread that human patrols no longer operated outside Sol space. Commander Zixpel of the Border Patrol had worked alongside human ships for over a decade. She knew their capabilities and their dedication better than most aliens. As she watched the last human patrol ship cross into Sol space, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. "This is a mistake," she told her first officer. "The humans weren't interfering. They were protecting us." "The Council knows best," her officer replied, but even he sounded uncertain. On the outer rim, Captain Ben Foster of the cargo hauler Detroit Star received his final orders to return to human space. His crew was mixed species, as were most rim runners. Aliens and humans had worked together so long that the boundaries between them had become meaningless. "I'm sorry," he told his alien crew members. "You'll need to find new ships. We're going home, and we're not coming back." His Zephyrian engineer, Kolvek, had served with Ben for 5 years. "But, Captain, we are family. How can you leave us?" Ben's voice cracked slightly as he answered. "Because our own family doesn't want us in the galaxy anymore. The Council has made that very clear." The withdrawal continued day by day until human space became truly isolated for the first time in 50 years. The Great Migration reversed itself, as humans who had spread across the galaxy returned to the worlds of their birth. Earth's population swelled with returning citizens who brought stories of alien ingratitude and council hostility. Admiral Sullivan completed her final report on the withdrawal and transmitted it to military headquarters on Luna. "Operation Homecoming is complete," she wrote. "All human assets have been consolidated within Sol's system perimeter. No human military presence remains in Council space." She paused before adding the final line. "Recommend maintaining current posture indefinitely. The galaxy has made its position clear regarding human participation in galactic affairs." President Adams read the report and felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Humanity had tried so hard to be good galactic citizens. They had followed Council rules even when those rules prevented them from saving lives. They had accepted criticism and punishment for acts of mercy and courage. Now they were free from all of that, free but also alone. For the first time in half a century, humans looked up at the stars and saw not opportunity, but exile. The galaxy, that had once welcomed them with open arms, had slowly closed its doors until only the cold remained. But perhaps isolation was what humanity needed. Perhaps they had spent too long trying to please others and not enough time taking care of themselves. The great human experiment in galactic citizenship was over. What would come next remained to be seen. In the darkness between the stars, human ships gathered around their ancient home worlds, like children returning to their mother's arms. They were safe now from alien criticism and council interference. But safety came at a price, and that price was everything they had built among the stars. The humans had departed in silence, just as they had been asked. Soon the galaxy would discover what that silence truly meant. 3 months after the last human ship had crossed into Sol space, the first real crisis hit the galaxy. A crystalline mining operation on Kepler 438b had triggered massive seismic activity that threatened the neighboring Zephyrian colony of New Zephyr. The automated distress systems activated immediately, sending emergency signals across all communication networks. But no human ships responded to the call. The crystalline hive operated through collective consciousness, and their local node expressed regret for the geological incident. However, they explained that their expertise was limited to mineral extraction and technological systems. They recommended that the Zephyrians contact appropriate geological specialists for assistance. Commander Talvek of the Zephyrian Colonial Defense Force frantically searched through their emergency contact databases. For 30 years, whenever geological emergencies occurred, human engineering teams had responded within hours. They possessed the heavy equipment needed for planetary stabilization, and more importantly, they were willing to risk their lives working in unstable environments. But the human contact frequencies now returned only automated messages. Humanity no longer operates outside Sol system boundaries. Please contact other council members for assistance. Talvek contacted every species in the sector, but received the same response from each. The ethereal collective deemed geological intervention a disruption of natural planetary evolution. The void seekers were too focused on their meditations to respond. The smaller species lacked the technology and resources for major planetary. Engineering Counselor Vexathera himself authorized an emergency request to Sol system. The response came from Admiral Kate Sullivan's office and was professional but devastating. Humanity no longer maintains geological response capabilities outside Sol space. We recommend consulting with council specialists for appropriate assistance. The evacuation of New Zephyr began 12 hours before the main fault line collapsed. 13,000 Zephyrians lost their homes as massive landslides buried their cities. The survivors were relocated to other worlds, but the psychological trauma rippled through Zephyrian society for months afterward. On the opposite side of the galaxy, Dr. Rachel Barnes sat in her apartment on Mars, reading intelligence reports that made her stomach turn. A plague had broken out on Rigel 7 among a species of peaceful herbivores called the Rigelians. They had never developed advanced medical technology, and their desperate calls for help echoed through space. Rachel had been part of human medical response teams for 15 years. She knew that a small team of human doctors could have contained the plague in its early stages. The Rigelians were humanoid enough that human medical techniques would work with minor modifications, but humanity no longer responded to such calls. The ethereal collective considered the situation but concluded that medical intervention would disrupt the natural cycle of life and death. The void seekers ignored the pleas entirely. The crystalline hive possessed no biological expertise since they were silicon-based life forms. For 3 weeks, the distress calls continued growing weaker each day. Then they stopped completely. Satellite scans of Rigel 7 showed empty cities overgrown with vegetation. An entire species had been wiped out by a disease that could have been easily cured with basic human medicine. President Nicole Adams received a carefully worded message from the Galactic Council expressing concern about the unfortunate situation on Rigel 7. The message requested human medical assistance as a special exception to their withdrawal policy. The response came from Dr. Helen Carter, who now served as Earth's chief medical officer. We regret that we cannot assist, as the Council has repeatedly noted human medical intervention in such matters violates the preservation protocol. We recommend allowing nature to take its course. The Council's own words thrown back at them. Elder Quindar of the Ethereal Collective felt something she had not experienced in centuries of existence. Doubt. In the perfect silence of her meditation chamber, she began to question whether their criticism of human interference had been wise. For the first time, she truly considered what human intervention had meant. Every time humans had violated Council protocols, they had been trying to save lives. Every time they had been criticized for aggression, they had been fighting to protect the innocent. Every time they had been punished for interference, they had been trying to help. But it was too late for second thoughts. The humans were gone, and the galaxy would have to learn to solve its own problems. The problems multiplied quickly. Without human patrol ships monitoring the trade routes, piracy increased dramatically. Small bands of raiders that had been suppressed for decades began operating openly. They knew that no human rapid response teams would arrive to stop them. Captain Felix Torres had been a human merchant marine who chose to remain in Council space when his species withdrew. Now he commanded a small freighter for the Merchant Coalition, but his military training made him valuable as a security consultant. "The pirates are getting bolder," he reported to Coalition headquarters. "They're hitting targets that would have been suicide missions when human patrols were active. 3 convoys attacked this week alone." The Coalition leadership listened with growing alarm. Insurance rates were skyrocketing as shipping became increasingly dangerous. Some routes were becoming completely unusable as pirate activity intensified. "What do you recommend?" asked Director Yul Marine, a tall, thin alien with gray skin. "Hire human security contractors," Felix replied immediately. "They're the only ones with the experience and equipment to handle this level of piracy. The Council has forbidden member species from hiring human military services," Yul Marin reminded him. "Then you're going to lose more ships," Felix said bluntly. "The pirates know human tactics because many of them learned by fighting humans. Without humans to counter them, they have a huge advantage." Meanwhile, on the border worlds, emergency services struggled to cope without human support. Commander Zixpel of the Border Patrol found herself facing crises that her forces were not equipped to handle. A space station fire that would have been routine for human emergency teams became a disaster that killed dozens. "We need better equipment," her chief engineer reported. "Human emergency systems were integrated into most of our stations. Without their technical support, we can't maintain proper safety standards." The pattern repeated across the galaxy. Systems that had been designed with human participation began failing without human maintenance. Medical facilities lost access to human pharmaceutical supplies. Defense networks that relied on human coordination became ineffective, but the Council maintained its position. Humanity's withdrawal was regrettable, but the galaxy would adapt. They refused to acknowledge that their criticism had driven away the very people who held their civilization together. In Sol's system, Admiral Sullivan monitored the reports with growing concern. She had friends among alien species, and watching their societies struggle was painful. But Earth's government had made its decision. Humanity would not return to being the galaxy's unpaid security force. "Request permission to deploy humanitarian aid to the Rigel survivors," Captain Jake Martinez asked during a staff meeting. "Denied," Sullivan replied. "We've made our position clear. The galaxy wanted us gone, and we're staying gone. But Admiral, entire species are dying out there. And they made that choice when they decided our help wasn't welcome." The reports continued to arrive daily. Each one told the same story of civilizations struggling without the human presence they had taken for granted. But pride prevented the Council from admitting their mistake. They continued to insist that the galaxy was better off without human interference. Elder Quindar floated alone in her chamber, contemplating the growing darkness. The Rigelians were extinct. New Zephyr was in ruins. Piracy was spreading like a plague across the trade routes, and humanity remained silent in their distant home system. For 1,000 years, she had believed in the wisdom of non-interference. Now she wondered if wisdom sometimes required getting your hands dirty. Perhaps some problems could only be solved by people willing to break rules and take risks. Perhaps the humans had understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes helping others required sacrifice. Sometimes doing good required ignoring the rules. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to fight for it. But understanding came too late. The humans were gone, and the galaxy was learning to live without them. The lessons were painful, and the tuition was paid in blood. 6 months into humanity's silence, the galaxy faced a crisis that made all previous incidents seem small. The Corvin Syndicate, a loose alliance of pirates and raiders, launched coordinated attacks on 3 major trade routes simultaneously. Their fleet struck with unprecedented boldness, no longer fearing human intervention. Captain Roy Mitchell now served aboard a defense platform orbiting Jupiter, monitoring the emergency transmissions flooding the communication networks. The raids were brutal and efficient, targeting merchant convoys with military precision. The pirates seemed to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum damage. The Zephyrian Defense Fleet responded first to reports of attacks in the Altair system. Their sleek ships were fast and maneuverable, but designed for reconnaissance rather than heavy combat. They arrived to find debris fields where crystalline cargo haulers had been destroyed and emergency beacons broadcasting distress signals into empty space. "Where are the survivors?" Commander Talvek demanded over the communication channel. "There are no survivors," came the grim reply from his sensor operator. "The pirates made sure of that. The Ethereal Collective deployed their ancient warships, magnificent vessels of living light that had once ruled the galaxy centuries ago. But the Ethereals had not fought a real war in over 1,000 years. Their tactics were outdated, and their crews had no experience with modern combat techniques. The Corvin pirates, despite being technologically inferior, easily outmaneuvered the Ethereal fleet. Their ships were crude, but their crews were experienced. Fighters who had learned from years of running battles with human patrol ships. They knew how to exploit weaknesses in enemy formations and strike before defenders could coordinate their response. Commander Zixpel of the Border Patrol studied the attack patterns from her command post on Nexus Station. Something about the raids bothered her beyond their obvious brutality. The pirates were striking with too much precision, hitting exactly the right targets at exactly the right times. "They're using human patrol routes," she realized suddenly. "Look at these coordinates." Every attack happened on a route that human ships used to patrol regularly. Her tactical officer pulled up historical data on human patrol patterns. The correlation was undeniable. The Corvin Syndicate was hitting every location where human ships had once maintained regular presence. For decades, humanity's quiet protection had deterred large-scale piracy by making certain areas too dangerous to attack. Now, with the humans gone, every route was open for exploitation. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days after the initial attacks. The chamber filled with angry voices and desperate pleas as representatives from affected species demanded action. Trade had ground to a halt across entire sectors. Insurance companies were refusing to cover cargo shipments. Several smaller species were threatening to withdraw from council protection entirely. Councillor Vexathara stood before the assembly looking less confident than usual. The success of his campaign to drive out the humans now seemed less like a victory. "The situation is challenging," he admitted reluctantly. "But we cannot allow ourselves to become dependent on human military intervention again. We must develop our own solutions." "With what?" demanded Representative Koltar of the Merchant Coalition. His species had lost dozens of ships in the raids. "The Zephyrian fleet is outgunned by pirate raiders. The ethereal ships might as well be museum pieces. The crystalline vessels are cargo haulers with basic defensive systems at best. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like smoke from a burning ship. They needed experienced combat crews and aggressive tactics. They needed ships designed for war rather than ceremony." They needed someone willing to hunt down pirates rather than simply defend against them. All eyes turned to the empty section where the human delegation had once sat. Perhaps we could offer the humans a contract for limited security services, suggested Elder Morthak of the Ethereal Collective. Purely temporary, of course, until we can establish our own capabilities. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but everyone knew where it was heading. The Council's pride warred with practical necessity, and necessity was winning. They crafted a formal request for emergency security consultation and transmitted it to Sol System with the full authority of the Galactic Council. The response came within hours, but not through normal diplomatic channels. Instead, Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen, her expression carved from stone. The transmission quality was perfect, suggesting that humanity had been monitoring Council communications all along. The Galactic Council has repeatedly informed us that human military actions are aggressive and destabilizing, she began. You have told us that our intervention in galactic affairs violates the natural order of things. You have demanded that we respect Council wisdom and allow events to unfold without interference. Her pause was meaningful and terrible. We have learned from your teachings. The current piracy situation appears to be the natural order asserting itself. We recommend allowing this process to continue without outside interference. The transmission ended, leaving the Council chamber in stunned silence. Panic spread through the assembly like fire through dry grass. Some members demanded stronger diplomatic language. Others suggested offering formal apologies for past criticisms. A few began quietly calculating which systems might still be defensible with their remaining forces, but the humans had made their position clear. The galaxy had rejected their help and now would face the consequences of that decision. In Sol System, Admiral Sullivan turned away from the communication console and looked out at the massive fleet assembling around Mars. Humanity had not been idle during their withdrawal. New ships emerged from orbital shipyards every week, incorporating lessons learned from decades of galactic service. The vessels were larger and more advanced than anything humans had deployed during their council years. Weapons that had been deemed too aggressive for peacekeeping operations were now standard equipment. Armor that had been considered unnecessarily militaristic now protected every hull. Captain Jake Martinez toured one of the new battleships with a mixture of pride and sadness. The ship was magnificent, a perfect fusion of human engineering and military necessity. But it would never see action protecting alien civilians or defending peaceful trade routes. She's beautiful, he told the ship's captain, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Davis. What's her mission profile? Defense of Sol System, Sarah replied. Same as all the others. We're not going anywhere. Meanwhile, the Corvin raids escalated into something approaching open warfare. Their success had attracted other criminal organizations, and the galaxy's shipping lanes became hunting grounds for an ever-growing fleet of pirates and raiders. Captain Felix Torres, the former human merchant marine, worked desperately to coordinate defense efforts for the merchant coalition. But it was like trying to stop a flood with his bare hands. Every convoy they protected meant 3 others were left vulnerable. Every successful defense was balanced by 2 catastrophic losses. We're losing this war, he reported to coalition leadership. The pirates have momentum and they're growing stronger every day. Soon they'll start targeting fixed installations instead of just ships. What do you recommend? Asked Director Yolmarine. Felix's answer was blunt and painful. Surrender, negotiate. Tribute payments to the Corvin syndicate and hope they're satisfied with money instead of destruction. The idea of paying tribute to pirates was humiliating, but it was better than watching their entire civilization burn. Across the galaxy, other species were coming to the same conclusion. The natural order the Council had wanted to preserve was chaos and violence, and in the darkness between stars, humanity waited and watched as the galaxy learned the true cost of rejecting those who had protected them. The humans had been called aggressive and destabilizing. Now the galaxy would discover what real aggression looked like when it wore a pirate's face. The Corvin raids had evolved into something far worse than anyone had imagined. What began as piracy had become territorial conquest, as criminal organizations realized the galaxy's defenders were helpless to stop them. Entire systems fell under. Pirate control and their populations faced slavery or death. Commander Zix Pell's patrol ship limped into dock at Theta Station with its hull scarred by plasma burns and its crew reduced by half. She had lost 3 vessels in the past month alone. Good ships with experienced crews who had fought bravely against impossible odds. The enemy seemed to anticipate their every move, striking when defenses were weakest and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. In the station's cantina, she sat across from Captain Felix Torres, nursing a drink that tasted like regret. Felix had served with human merchant marines for 15 years before choosing to remain in Council space when his species withdrew. Now he commanded a small freighter for the Merchant Coalition, but his military knowledge made him invaluable as a tactical consultant. "They're using human strategies," Felix explained while reviewing attack patterns on his tablet. "Multi-vector approaches, communication jamming, targeting command ships first. Someone has been studying our old military manuals very carefully." Zixpel clicked her mandibles in frustration. "Your people faced these tactics before?" "All the time," Felix confirmed. "Pirates love copying successful military techniques. The difference is we knew how to counter our own methods. We had developed responses to these patterns over decades of anti-piracy operations. And now that knowledge is locked away in Sol's system," Felix nodded grimly, "along with the ships and crews that knew how to use it." Their conversation was interrupted by emergency klaxons echoing through the station. Another convoy was under attack, this time in the Proxima system. Zixpel's ship was too damaged to respond, but Felix's freighter could carry a rescue team to assist with survivor recovery. They arrived to find a massacre. 12 merchant vessels had been completely destroyed, their cargo scattered across space like a grotesque celebration. The pirates had been thorough and efficient, but also brutally cruel. Escape pods had been targeted specifically, ensuring no witnesses survived to report what they had seen. But the raiders had made one crucial mistake. In their haste to destroy evidence, they had left behind debris that Felix recognized. Computer, fragments, weapon signatures, and fuel traces that pointed to a specific base of operations. "I know where they're hiding," he told Zixpel as they collected the evidence. "The Epsilon Eridani system. There's an abandoned human mining facility there." Zixpel's eyes widened as she understood the implications. "They're using human installations against us." The intelligence reached the Council within hours, but their response was paralyzed by politics and procedure. The Zephyrians wanted to open negotiations with the pirates. The Ethereals insisted on studying the problem from multiple philosophical perspectives. The crystalline hive spent days calculating probability matrices and risk assessments. While they debated, the pirates struck again. This time their target was Sanctuary Station in the Vega system, the refugee facility that humanity had built and operated for 10 years. A skeleton crew of volunteers from various species had remained behind when the humans evacuated, determined to continue the station's humanitarian mission. The attack was swift and merciless. The station's minimal defenses were overwhelmed in minutes. The pirates showed no interest in taking prisoners or stealing supplies. They simply wanted to send a message about what happened to symbols of human compassion. Dr. Yilnara, the Zephyrian physician who had worked alongside human doctors for 8 years, found herself trapped in the medical bay as fires spread through the station. Her final transmission was broadcast across the galaxy before the communication array was destroyed. "Where are the humans?" she gasped as smoke filled her lungs. "Where are the people who built this place? Who would have fought for us? Who would have died for strangers they never met? The transmission went viral across galactic networks. For the first time, ordinary citizens began asking the same questions. Where were the humans who used to respond to every crisis? Where were the ships that once patrolled every dangerous route? Where were the people who had made the galaxy safer just by existing? Public pressure mounted on the Council to take action. Emergency sessions convened daily but produced nothing except heated arguments and procedural delays. Some members began privately questioning whether humanity's withdrawal had been a mistake, but none were willing to admit it publicly. The breaking point came when the Corvin Syndicate captured Nexus Prime, the galaxy's primary communication hub. With control of the facility, they could monitor all Council communications while broadcasting their own propaganda across civilized space. The message that filled every screen in the galaxy was simple and terrifying. Corvin leader Vex Blackstar, his face scarred by years of violence, announced the new reality. "The old order is finished," he declared. "Your Council of Fools has proven that weakness invites destruction. We offer you a choice. Serve us and live, or resist us and watch your worlds burn." The threat was not empty. Blackstar had assembled the largest pirate fleet in galactic history by absorbing smaller criminal organizations. His forces controlled dozens of systems, and his influence spread like a cancer through civilized space. In the Sol system, President Nicole Adams received reports of Nexus Prime's fall with growing alarm. The communication hub had been humanity's gift to the galaxy, built with human technology and protected by human forces for decades. Watching it fall to pirates felt like watching their children being murdered. "Request permission to deploy relief." "Forces," Admiral Sullivan asked during an emergency cabinet meeting. "Denied," Adams replied firmly. "We made our decision and we're sticking to it. The galaxy chose to reject our protection." "But, Madam President, entire civilizations are collapsing, and they made that choice when they decided our help wasn't welcome." The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Humanity would not intervene no matter how desperate the situation became. They had been called aggressive and interfering for trying to help. Now the galaxy would learn what real aggression looked like. Captain Jake Martinez stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching Earth's blue oceans through the viewport. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of human space, civilizations were dying. Species that had criticized humanity for their interference were begging for help that would never come. "It doesn't feel right," he told his executive officer, Commander Lisa Park. "Sitting here while the galaxy burns." "The galaxy made its choice," Lisa replied. "They wanted us gone, and we're gone. What happens next is not our responsibility anymore." But, even as she spoke, the words Lisa felt the weight of abandoning their former allies. Humanity had always been the species that helped others, even when it cost them dearly. Staying silent while innocents suffered went against everything they believed in, yet pride and principle demanded they maintain their withdrawal. The Council had spent decades criticizing human actions and demanding they stop interfering in galactic affairs. Now, they had exactly what they wanted: a galaxy free from human interference. They were learning that sometimes getting what you want is the worst thing that can happen to you. Elder Quindar floated alone in her meditation chamber on the ethereal homeworld, contemplating the growing darkness. The Corvin Syndicate controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy now. Civilized species were either surrendering or fleeing to the remaining safe zones. The perfect order the Council had tried to preserve was collapsing into chaos. For the first time in her 1,000-year existence, she considered the possibility that her people had been wrong. Perhaps order sometimes required force. Perhaps peace sometimes demanded violence. Perhaps the humans had understood truths that the ethereals in their ancient wisdom had forgotten. But understanding came too late. The humans were gone, and the galaxy was learning to live without them. The lesson was written in burning worlds and silent comm channels, Some prices could only be paid in blood, and the bill was coming due. 1 year after humanity's departure from the galactic stage, the Council faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of civilized space. The Corvin Syndicate had evolved from a pirate organization into a conquering empire that controlled nearly half the galaxy. Trade had collapsed, governments had fallen, and billions lived under the rule of criminals who showed no mercy to the weak. Elder Quindar of the Ethereal Collective floated alone in her meditation chamber, contemplating the unthinkable. For the first time in her species' proud history, she was considering surrender to beings they had once dismissed as inferior. The pirates had adapted to every tactic the Council deployed, countering their moves with embarrassing ease. The worst part was knowing that one transmission to Sol system could end the nightmare. Human ships could sweep the pirates from space in a matter of weeks, but pride had built walls that seemed impossible to climb. The final blow came when Corvin forces captured 3 more core worlds in a single week. Their fleet had grown massive. By absorbing the ships of defeated species and recruiting desperate crews who saw no other choice for survival. Vex Blackstar now commanded resources that rivaled the entire Council fleet. His latest broadcast filled screens across remaining free space with a message of brutal honesty. "Your leaders have failed you," he announced, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "They drove away the only people who could protect you. Now you will serve new masters or you will die." The Council convened in emergency session, but their chambers felt hollow without the steady presence of the human delegation. Ambassador Lisa Morgan's empty chair seemed to mock their desperation. Counselor Vex Thara stood before the assembly with trembling hands. The Zephyrian who had led the campaign against human interference now faced the consequences of his success. "We must consider all options," he said quietly. "Speak plainly," demanded Representative Koltar. "Say what everyone is thinking." Vexathara's voice broke as he spoke the words that doomed his political career. "We need the humans back." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence for their collective pride. For over a year they had insisted the galaxy was better off without human interference. Now they faced the reality that without human protection, their civilization was doomed. The formal request for assistance was drafted by committee, revised 17 times, and transmitted to Sol System with the full authority of the Galactic Council. It acknowledged in carefully diplomatic language that humanity's withdrawal may have been premature and requested their emergency consultation on the current crisis. The response came within hours, but not through expected diplomatic channels. Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen, her expression harder than vacuum-forged steel. "The Galactic Council repeatedly told us that our military actions were aggressive and destabilizing," she began. "You informed us that our interference violated the natural order of things. You demanded that we respect your wisdom and allow nature to take its course." Her pause carried the weight of 1,000 burning worlds. "We have learned from your teachings. The current situation appears to be nature taking its course. We recommend allowing the process to continue without outside interference." The transmission ended, leaving the Council in stunned silence. Panic spread through the chamber like wildfire. Some members demanded stronger language, others suggested offering formal apologies. A few began calculating escape routes to systems beyond Corvin reach. But salvation came from an unexpected source. Captain Felix Torres, the former human merchant marine who had remained in Council space, requested permission to address the assembly. His words carried the weight of bitter experience. "You're approaching this wrong," he told them bluntly. "Humans don't respond to diplomatic pressure or formal requests. They respond to genuine need and honest acknowledgement of error. You want their help? Stop acting like politicians and start acting like people who made a terrible mistake." The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Pride warred with necessity. Diplomatic protocol clashed with desperate reality. In the end, it was Elder Quindar who broke the deadlock. "I will go myself," she announced, "to Sol System, to speak with them directly, to apologize." The word fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples throughout the chamber. For 1,000 years, the Ethereals had never apologized to anyone. Their ancient pride had been the foundation of galactic civilization. 3 days later, a small diplomatic vessel crossed the boundary into human space for the first time in over a year. Elder Quindar traveled alone, her ship broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. The response came quickly. She was granted permission to approach Earth, but only after surrendering all weapons and submitting to complete security scanning. The humiliation was absolute but necessary. She met with President Nicole Adams in the IE, same orbital facility where the final council session had occurred over a year before. The human leader listened in silence as Quindar explained the galaxy's situation, the desperate need for assistance, and the complete failure of their attempts at self-defense. "You want us to return," Adams said when the elder finished. "To fix the problems that our departure helped create." "Yes," Quindar admitted, her ethereal form dimming with shame. "I was wrong. We were all wrong. Humanity's role in galactic affairs was not interference. It was protection. We failed to understand the difference until it was too late." Adams leaned back in her chair, considering carefully. "And if we return, what guarantee do we have that the same criticisms won't resurface when the crisis passes? That we won't be told to withdraw again when our methods prove inconvenient?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Quindar's response carried the weight of absolute honesty. "None. You have no such guarantees because we cannot promise to be wiser in the future than we were in the past. All I can offer is truth. Without humanity, the galaxy burns. With you, it might survive." President Adams excused herself for private consultation with her cabinet and military advisors. The debate was intense and emotional. Many humans wanted to help despite their anger. Others demanded guarantees that would never be forthcoming. Some suggested conditions that would make humanity the galaxy's rulers rather than protectors. 12 hours later, Adams returned with humanity's answer. "We will return," she announced. "But not as we were before. The age of human deference to council wisdom is over. We will act according to our own moral compass regardless of criticism or complaint. We will interfere when interference is necessary. We will be aggressive when aggression serves justice." A pause heavy with implication. "And if the council cannot accept this reality, then you are welcome to face your enemies alone." Elder Quindar bowed her ethereal head in acceptance. "We understand. The galaxy will learn to live with human initiative." "No," Adams corrected firmly. "The galaxy will learn to live with human leadership." 6 weeks later, the first human fleet crossed back into council space in over a year. Admiral Sullivan's flagship led a force unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. New ships bristling with advanced weapons and crewed by veterans who had spent a year preparing for this moment. The Corvan pirates, confident in their superiority and control, moved to intercept what they assumed was a desperate rescue mission. They had grown accustomed to easy victories against outdated alien fleets. They learned too late that humanity had not been idle during their exile. The battle for Nexus Prime lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human ships moved with precision that bordered on supernatural, their tactics perfectly coordinated and their weapons devastatingly effective. The massive Corvan fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for months was reduced to debris and emergency beacons. Vex Blackstar himself died when his flagship exploded under concentrated fire from 3 human battleships. His final transmission was a scream of rage and disbelief that this small human force had destroyed everything he had built. The message that went out to every corner of civilized space was simple and clear. Humanity has returned. Normal operations will resume immediately. The council chambers felt different when Ambassador Lisa Morgan returned to her old chair. The dynamic had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. When she spoke, the assembly listened with respect, born of hard-earned wisdom. When human diplomats offered advice, other species considered it carefully before responding. The galaxy had learned its lesson at a cost measured in burning worlds and silent voices. Some forms of interference were not interference at all, but protection. Some forms of aggression were not aggression at all, but justice. And some species, no matter how humble their origins, were born to lead others toward a better future. Humanity had returned to the stars not as supplicants seeking approval, but as guardians willing to bear the burden of protecting an ungrateful galaxy. They had departed in silence when driven away by pride and prejudice. They returned in strength when invited back by wisdom born of desperation. The council had learned its mistake, but the education came at a price that would never be forgotten. In the end, they discovered that humanity's greatest gift was not their technology or their ships, but their willingness to stand between civilization and chaos, no matter the personal cost.